Academic Affairs in the Division of Biology and Medicine. On behalf of the University and the Division of Biology and Medicine, I'd like to welcome all of you and thank you for taking the time out of your schedules to participate in this afternoon's promotion workshop for academic track faculty. It is so great to see that you are investing this time in your faculty promotion, and I hope that you will see that we are here to help you be successful. One of the offices I oversee is the Office of Biomed Faculty Administration, which supports more than 2,000 faculty in the division. We facilitate the recruitment, appointment, retention, and promotion of faculty members across our 16 clinical departments, as well as the 4 campus-based biology departments. One of the ways in which we support our faculty is through informational workshops like this. Typically, we host one large annual promotions workshop for all Brown Clinical Department faculty. But this year, in consultation with the Clinical Faculty Advisory Committee and the Medical Faculty Executive Committee, we decided to split the workshop into 2 workshops, which allows us to focus on the different needs of our 2 groups of medical faculty. The academic track faculty, who are on the teaching scholar, research scholar, and Perens research tracks, and the clinical track faculty, who are on the clinician educator and clinical tracks. The clinical track faculty workshop was held on October 27th, and I think it was fairly successful as a separate session. I'd like to thank and recognize the groups who've made this workshop possible. First, the Office of Biomed Faculty Administration, and especially Michelle Turcott, Abby Botello, Alex Kelleher, Matt Bolton, and Sarah Wilson, who've done the heavy lifting to make this happen. I'd also like to thank the Office of Continuing Medical Education in allowing us to offer CME credits. I'm incredibly grateful to our panelists and our breakout session presenters who have graciously given their time to share their wisdom and experiences. And last, but certainly not least, I'd like to thank the Medical Faculty Executive Committee for co-sponsoring this workshop. Now I'd like to introduce the MFEC Chair, Dr. Slim Sooner, who's Professor of Emergency Medicine, Professor of Surgery, and Professor of Engineering, to speak about the MFEC, their work, and how they support our faculty. Slim.
Thank you, Dr. Sear.
Call me Shelley.
Okay. I didn't know how formal we were here, so thanks, Shelley. Thank you again. I know everybody is super busy, and thank you for taking the time to attend this workshop, and it will certainly pay off as you negotiate your way through the promotions process. The Medical Faculty Executive Committee is the representative committee for the Alpert Medical School faculty and clinical departments. This committee coordinates with the Faculty Executive Committee at Brown University. One of the charges of the committee is that it reviews and comments on any change in the medical school policies, procedures relating to faculty appointments, reappointments, promotions, and other matters that relate to the faculty in the clinical departments. Before the FEC takes any action, this comes through our committee. We are also the agent to investigate and attempt to resolve grievances for all of the medical faculty, whatever track they are in. Last year, the MFEC, along with the CFAC, the Clinical Faculty Advisory Committee, had a subcommittee looking at the promotions process at Brown. And their charge was to examine the promotions process and explore ways to improve and simplify it for the faculty. I believe I saw Gada, who chaired that subcommittee. She was also the past chair of the MFEC last year. through their work, and there were others on this committee which did a lot of work, they identified barriers, facilitators, benefits, drawbacks of promotion, and made some suggestions to streamline the process and make it easier for faculty who are always split in, two directions, clinical care and their academic work. I think that's all I'm going to say about that. That committee submitted a long report. We're going to continue this work this year and in the future, and perhaps co-sponsor other workshops. And if you have any questions related to this, any concerns, please feel free to reach me, ssooner@brown.edu. Back to you, Shelley.
Thanks so much, Slim. And I would also like to acknowledge Gada and Simone Vasilian's leadership in that survey around the promotions process. Both of them presented to the department chairs and continue to do work in support of improving the promotion processes. So thank you, Simone, and thank you, Gada, for that work. And thank you to the MFEC for their commitment to supporting our faculty's success. So before I begin the presentation, I would like to start with some logistics. The first hour of this workshop is being recorded and it will be available later for viewing. The breakout sessions will not be recorded, so don't expect to be able to view those later if you had that in mind. Please submit any questions that you have via the chat function directly to Alex Kelleher, who will be monitoring the chat throughout the program, and she will be able to ask those questions of our panelists when we convene the panel. We'll start the program with a general overview of the promotions process, and that will be followed by the panel discussion, during which time there's going to be ample opportunity for our panelists to address your questions. I'd like to give a special thanks to those who provided questions in advance of the program, and I promise that we will be sure to get to them. At this time, and with good luck, I hope, I am going to share my PowerPoint presentation, which will also be available after this event and posted on the BMFA website. So let me try to do the screen share. This is always that moment of truth. Okay. Seems to... There. Can you see my screen slides?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Success. All right. I'm done now. That was the hard part. Okay. So the goals of this workshop are to provide some basic information about the faculty tracks and the promotion dossier process and timeline. I hope that we will be able to dispel some myths that may be circulating and clear up any misunderstanding that any of you might have about the promotion process. We'll have an opportunity to share promotion tips, both in this presentation, but also in the panel discussion in the breakout rooms, and again, answer any of your questions. So to begin, let's look at the faculty tracks and titles. And these are 3 of the 5 faculty tracks, and these are the ones that are represented in this workshop, the academic tracks. So the first is the Perens Research track, and the titling associated with this track is Professor of Department X with the modifier Perens Research. The second is the Research Scholar track, and the titling here is Professor of Department X. And then finally, the Teaching Scholar track, and again, it's the same titling as the Research Scholar track with Professor of Department X with no modifier. This pie chart gives you a sense of the overall composition of our faculty in biomed. And you can see that we have over 2,000 faculty overall. About 2/3 of the faculty are in the clinical tracks. So the vast, sorry about that. The vast majority are in the clinical track, followed next by clinician educator. The academic tracks represent approximately 25% of the faculty, with the pre-track, which is the track designated for individuals who are undifferentiated, sort of stem cells, before they differentiate into either research scholar or teaching scholar tracks. And then you can see that the research scholar track and the Perens research track are roughly equivalent, over 100 faculty members, and the teaching scholar track has more faculty members in that track. So now let's move into the standards and criteria that relate to each of the individual tracks. I acknowledge that this slide is fairly busy, but I think it's a very useful slide, and it's a slide that will be available in the PowerPoint that will be posted on the Biomed faculty website. So this slide in particular relates to the associate professor rank. And what you can see is that the 5 tracks are represented across the top, with the tracks that we're focusing on today highlighted in yellow. And then along the left column, you can see the criteria that are associated with each of the tracks. Within the cells, there are designations for not required, and then positively considered. So those are the designations. And I think this slide is very, very useful for you to look at to see how the tracks differ in the requirements. What I would like to point out is that the research scholar and Perens research tracks are very, very similar here at the associate professor rank. In fact, they're the same except for the requirement for teaching, mentoring, and/or advising excellence for the research scholar track, and the fact that this is positively considered for the Perens research track. Otherwise, they are exactly the same. I'd like to just point out that this was a change that we made several years ago to add mentoring and advising to the teaching excellence requirement for the research scholar track, so that faculty in the Perens research track who were doing a good amount of advising and mentoring, if they so chose, could move into the research scholar track. But otherwise, the tracks are equivalent in terms of the requirements. The teaching scholar track is different than the research tracks for sure, where research is not required at all. Certainly it would be positively considered, so I think that we could consider this a PC as well. Scholarly productivity is required as it is for research scholar and Perens research, but I would say that the scholarship that is acknowledged in the teaching scholar track is broader than we'd consider in the research scholar or Perens research. So chapters count, books count, and non-peer reviewed articles may also count, or at least they're positively considered. Across all 3 tracks, a national reputation is required at the associate professor rank. But the real difference in the teaching scholar track from the research track is the educational leadership requirement. Otherwise, they're exactly the same. The next slide is the same as the former slide in terms of the format, except that this is for the professor rank. And what you can see is that a lot of things don't change for the professor rank. Scholarly productivity is the same. What does change is the requirement for a national versus international reputation. So for the research tracks, an international reputation is required at the professor rank, and for the teaching scholar, it's a national reputation. But I'm sorry, this is very twitchy, but I will say that, that the national reputation for the professor rank and the teaching scholar track is that you have to have a national reputation as an educator. So it does change from the associate professor rank slightly. And then otherwise, the requirements remain the same. The following slides are really just track specific, breaking down the same standards and criteria that are sort of shorthanded on the previous 2 slides. So these are the criteria for the teaching scholar track. And what you can see here is that the requirements are for associate professor versus professor. And where they change from the associate to professor rank, the row is divided, and where it stays the same, it's the same. It just goes across. So teaching leadership at the associate professor rank, a major educational role is required, but at the professor rank, it is required that the individual lead an educational program. Again, in terms of reputation for associate professor, it's a national reputation in an area of expertise, but at the full professor rank, it has to be as an educator in the area of expertise as well. Likewise, this is the research scholar track. There is a subtle difference in the requirement for research at the associate versus the full professor rank. At the associate, independent or collaborative research programs qualify. At the full professor rank, the contribution to those collaborative research programs should be substantive and distinct. Again, scholarship is required, a record of excellence in teaching, advising, and mentoring. And then again, from the associate to the full professor rank, it goes from national reputation to an international reputation. Similarly, the research track, again, the difference between the associate professor rank and full professor rank is that subtle difference around the independent or collaborative research program. And then the reputation as national reputation at associate and international at full professor. If you are interested in reading the full standards and criteria, they are available on our website as well. So there's a new criterion that has been established this past year. And this was based on a recommendation from a working group that I convened last fall, I think. And it was approved by the biomed advisory bodies over the course of 2021. And the new criterion is that for all faculty tracks, for all ranks, there is a requirement that the individual have demonstrated a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, this will not be fully in effect until July 1st, 2024, because we wanted to give faculty who are in the pipeline for promotion an opportunity to prepare their dossiers to address this new criterion. But faculty are encouraged to include any DEI activities prior to that time if they're participating in them, because they will get credit. We have also established metrics that include examples of DEI activities that would count. These are just suggestions, and we have actually encouraged departments to put together their own metrics that may be specialty specific. So I'm hoping that departments will be doing that over the next months. But as I say, this will not be fully in effect for 3 years, essentially. I am more than happy to go to departments to do presentations on anything that relates to faculty promotions, but particularly if there are questions about this new criterion, I'm happy to help address that. So as you put together the components of your promotion dossier, you may think it's something like this, but trust me, it is not. The good news is that we've gone all electronic, but even when we were doing it with paper, they were not this extensive, and particularly since we have eliminated the requirement for a teaching dossier, the dossiers are not quite so voluminous. So what is in a promotion dossier and who's responsible for what? So on the left side is what you are responsible for as a candidate, and on the right side is what the department is responsible for providing in the dossier. So as a candidate for promotion, you are responsible to provide an updated CV, a personal statement, your evaluations, and a list of suggested referees for the department to solicit. And so you give that list. You do not know who's being asked, but the department has that list to decide whom they would like to ask. The department is responsible for the, for the chair and chief letters of support, the department promotions committee report, the letter that they send out to referees soliciting that letter, so a sample letter that is sent to the referees, the referee letters that are submitted. So those are both from the department list as well as the candidates list. And again, the department also is responsible for evaluations that they may have that you may not have as the faculty member. So what are some tips for your curriculum vitae? So as you think about putting together your CV, keep in mind that one of your ultimate goals is to make the reviewer's job easy. And so to that extent, anything that you can do to make their job easier will be best for you going forward. You also obviously want to get everything that you've done. You want to get credit for all of it in your CV. So to the end of making the reviewer's job easier, use the Brown format. I mean, we're all familiar with the Brown format. We expect the CV to be in that format. So go to our website, the Brown format is there. You can add to the Brown format so it's not restrictive, but be sure that the basic structure of your CV follows that format. Highlight your name on publications. That helps reviewers who are trying to figure out if you've had some first authored publications, some senior authored publications. Can be very, very helpful. When you're including grant information, make sure that you include the agency, your role, and the dollar amount. Separate your presentations into local, regional, national, and international. That might seem obvious, but we've been seeing a lot of CVs lately that do not separate. And one thing is that it doesn't help the reviewer. The other thing is it doesn't help you, because if you don't separate them, the reviewer can't tell whether that presentation you did in Providence at Brown was a local presentation or was it actually could have been for an international audience. So be sure to include that information when you list your presentations. Organize your professional organization activities with listings of your roles for each organization. That really can help the reviewer see that you've had a progression of your leadership in that organization and your participation. If you can do this, and I highly recommend it, get feedback from your colleagues. Also, obviously, get feedback from your chief, from the promotion committee. A lot of promotion committees review your CVs before they actually start to put your dossier together. And also, obviously, ask your chair. If you can, ask a recently promoted faculty member if you can review their CV and see how they might have organized things to give you some tips. The CV should include your teaching components. As I mentioned, we no longer require the teaching dossier for people going up in the teaching scholar track, but the components of that should nonetheless be included in your CV. So keep a record, include a record of all your teaching, advising, mentoring activities and the titles. Include your role in the course or rotation. Were you a preceptor? Were you an invited lecturer? Give the dates, the numbers and types of learners that participated. List your advisees and mentees. And this is especially important for faculty who are in the research tracks to get credit for that advising and mentoring that you may be doing in the absence of formal teaching that you might not be able to do. Include all of the teaching awards you've received, any scholarship that has resulted from your teaching, advising, and or mentoring. And it's a good idea here that if you have published manuscripts with advisees, then highlight their name, maybe put an asterisk and indicate that they were one of your advisees with whom you published. Include all of the curricula that you've developed and whether it was disseminated and potentially published. Again, that can be considered scholarship and can count toward the requirement in the teaching scholar track. And then include all of your evaluations for the classes, the lectures, and the presentations you've done, including those lectures and presentations that you may have done outside of Brown. If they provided you with evaluations, include those as well. The research components, I think we've sort of already gone over this, but include all of your original publications, obviously, your research grants with the specific information, and then a listing of any of your research trainees. Keep a file of your evaluations, and this includes your teaching evaluations as well as any evaluations that you may have received for mentoring and advising activities. For those of you who have teaching evaluations, if you're teaching medical students, they are likely to be in the OASIS system, which is our electronic evaluation system. And then if you're teaching at the GME level, it might be New Innovations or eValue. And those should be available to you. And if they're not available to you because of numbers that are insufficient, you can often ask the administrators to help you, and they can submit them to the department to include without them giving them to you, because there may not be enough to preserve anonymity. Include any evaluations from those invited presentations and the advisees and mentees. And do ask program administrators to help. So clerkship directors, residency, fellowship, CME, they can all help gather your evaluations. The personal statement is always an interesting piece of your dossier, and it's my favorite part to read. I think this is where there may be some myths out there about what needs to be in your personal statement. I'm going to give you my view of what it should represent, but there are departments that I think may differ in this. But what I like is when someone coming up for promotion tells the story of their career path. So it is essentially a biographical essay. It's important to keep it brief and 2 pages max, and that doesn't mean you can lower the font down to nothing. For those of us with presbyopia, it's not a good thing. Explain what might not be clear from your CV. So don't just simply put your CV to prose, but rather fill in some gaps, give it some depth, some color. And so this is a place where you can really show what isn't clear, show more of you than you can just read in your CV. Help the reader understand who you are, what you do, and what gives you joy in your career. And here, this is a caution, which is remember your track. So as you talk about what you do and what gives you joy, if you're on the teaching scholar track, presumably teaching gives you joy. We would hope so. So don't focus your entire personal statement on research, because the reader would then think, why aren't they on the research track? So remember that as you look back on your personal statement, whether it actually does represent the track that you're on. Present your goals and your aspirations and how you hope to realize them, because the reviewers are also looking to see, what are you going to do going forward? Again, remember your track. And then finally, it's like real estate, location, 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 remember your track. So if you were somebody outside of Brown reading your personal statement, could you actually guess what track you are on? I think that's a good way to gauge whether you've represented yourself well in your personal statement. And by the way, if your true passion is research and you're on the teaching scholar track or vice versa, you might want to really consider a track switch. So that's something that you would certainly want to discuss with your department chair. So referee letters are, again, this can be somewhat confusing, but overall, the purpose of a referee letter is to provide an objective and unbiased assessment of how you meet Brown's promotion criteria, your reputation, be it regional, national, or international, as a researcher and or educator in your field, and the likelihood of your promotion at the referee's institution. So these are the things that we expect to be components of the referee letters when we receive them. Referees should be at arm's length. So what does that mean? This is where the controversy kind of exists, which is that they shouldn't have been close collaborators with you. They should not be your mentor or your mentee. So it's best to have somebody that has some distance from you. How much distance? It often depends, because there are some fields that are so small that everybody knows everybody and has collaborated with each other. So that can be problematic. But nonetheless, there should be a little bit of distance so that that objective assessment can be provided. Referees have to be at your promotion rank or higher. So if you're going to associate, they have to be associate or full. And if you're going to full, they all have to be full professors. Referees may not know you, and they may not know you at all, but they are provided with your dossier for their review. And this again is a reason that you want to make sure that your dossier represents you very, very well for somebody outside of Brown who really doesn't know you. So the promotion timeline can feel very long, and I get it. But what I would say is that the promotion timeline is a lot like baking sourdough bread, for those of you who took up sourdough bread baking in the pandemic. So there's the overall time, which, you know, for sourdough bread may be days, but the active time is actually pretty short. You're only involved with it, you know, sort of at the beginning and occasionally along the way, and then at the end. Promotion timeline is very similar. So there's, you know, it's a long time period, but your activity as a candidate is really front loaded. And then you have to probably provide an updated CV as it goes along. But the length of the process is really getting all of those components of the dossier together, and particularly getting those referee letters and having them reviewed by the promotion committee. So what are the steps in the promotion process? So first, the candidate, the division chief, or the department chair decide if the time is right. So you would have a meeting, you decide, yes, it's the time for me to go up for promotion. You're informed of the departmental deadlines, and you start to prepare your documents for your promotion dossier. In most departments, there's a preliminary departmental review, and they say go forward or not. And then the promotion committee department chair informs you about going forward for your promotion. Next, the department solicits those referee letters for your candidate. So you don't have anything to do with that at that point. The promotion committee reviews the completed dossiers and then makes a recommendation to the department chair. The department then submits the complete dossier to CMFA. CMFA reviews those dossiers and then votes on the promotion. So there are some term limits for two of the tracks. So for the teaching scholar track and the research scholar track, there are term limits at the assistant professor rank. There are not term limits for the Perens research track. So what are those term limits? So at the assistant professor rank, there are three-year terms allowed before an individual has to be brought forward for promotion. The promotion review typically occurs 1 year before the end of that total 9-year term. You can come up earlier, but if you push it out to the end, it would be three-year terms. You can come up a year earlier than the 8th year, a year later than the 8th year. If you waive a 1-year notice, you can be reviewed in that final year. There are extensions that are allowed in those three-year terms. So you're allowed one-year extension per 3-year term. So you could potentially have 3 years of extensions over the course of those 3 terms. The request for those extensions must be submitted within a year of whatever the event is that would warrant an extension. And I'm very flexible and liberal in granting extensions. So it doesn't have to be an illness or a parental leave. It can be a change in research focus or any number of other things. Yeah, I'm pretty flexible about that. I don't think I've ever denied a request for an extension. We also gave an automatic 1-year extension to all teaching scholar and research scholar assistant professors in 2020, acknowledging the disruption to everybody's career from COVID. And the reason we limited it to teaching scholar and research scholar is because they're the only 2 tracks that have term limits that would be affected. And these are automatic, and in addition to the other extensions that you might have requested. So this may be your fear that, behind closed doors, CMFA is making all kinds of deals and wheeling and dealing. But let me tell you that this is not your CMFA at all. Your CMFA is in fact an 8-member committee composed of full professors, either in the medical academic tracks or campus-based tenured faculty. So they all have to be full professors. Of the 8 members, there are 5 from clinical departments, 1 from a biology department, 1 from the School of Public Health, and 1 from another university department. The committee reviews all senior level promotions and appointments in clinical departments. We meet throughout the academic year, and all the members of CMFA read all the dossiers and formulate questions for the department chair. The department chair then presents the candidates to the committee and answers the questions that were posed during the discussion. The committee then votes, obviously. So this is just giving you a sense of the overall approval process. So again, it starts in the Department Promotions Committee and then goes to the chair. The chair then forwards the dossier to CMFA. CMFA votes, presuming that CMFA approves the action, which I will say the vast majority of actions are approved, because there are places along the way where you might have been told that you're not ready for promotion. So when people get to CMFA, the vast majority are approved because you are definitely ready for promotion. This is the point at which the chair can inform you of the CMFA vote. So I have a conversation with the chair. I tell the chair that the action was approved and allow the chair to contact you and say it was approved, with the caveat that it then goes to the dean and the provost and the president for their approval. At this point, I've got to say that even though the dean, provost, and president could overturn the action, they virtually never do. Once the president approves, then the letter goes out to you informing you of the approval of your promotion that goes into effect as of July 1st of that next academic year. So I am here to encourage you to go forward with your promotion. If your department tells you you're ready, there's no harm certainly in having a review by your division chief and your department chair and potentially the department promotion committee chair to see if they think you're ready, but also to give you feedback about where you need help. So as I say, we are here to support you in your promotion process, and we are all aiming for your success. So thank you. Now I am going to, actually, I think there's one more slide, because I'm going to now ask our panelists to convene, and our panelists are going to introduce themselves, but I am going to stop sharing. And I think I stopped sharing. Did I stop sharing, Matt?
Yes.
Okay.
You're in good shape.
Right. I have said that when the pandemic is over, I will have mastered Zoom. So now I would like to, as I say, ask our panelists to convene. I don't really know what that means in a Zoom format, but nonetheless, hi panelists. So I am going to ask you to introduce yourselves, and I'm going to start, and introduce yourselves and tell the audience how you have participated in the promotions process. So in alphabetical order, I'm going to start with Matt Bolton.
Hi, I'm Matthew Bolton. I am the manager of academic affairs in BMFA. I work closely with Shelley and Alex Kelleher, the director. I am kind of the first stop for dossiers after they've left your department, after they have been approved by your, after you've been approved by your promotions committee. I am the guy that collects the dossiers, just make sure that all the components are in place, that all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and coordinate the review schedule for the academic year. After the CMFA votes, I then make sure that all the paperwork gets forwarded to the correct parties, and just make sure ultimately that everything gets processed appropriately and you get promoted, you get your letter and your new title.
Thanks, Matt. So Tony Caldamone.
Hi, everyone. Tony Caldamone. Thanks for allowing me to participate in this. I'm a former member of CMFA, was on that committee for a couple of terms a number of years back. And for the past 4 years or so, I've headed the promotions and appointments committee for the Department of Surgery. I'm from urology, more specifically pediatric urology, and I'm the in-house baseball expert.
Indeed. Jen Friedman.
Hi there, I'm Jennifer Friedman, Department of Pediatrics. I have been on the Pediatrics Promotions Committee for many years, I think starting right about 5 minutes after I was promoted to professor. So I'm still on the promotions committee for the Department of Pediatrics, and I did 2 terms with Shelley and Matt on CMFA.
And we miss her. Steve Rasmussen. Oh, Steve, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm Steve Rasmussen. I'm the chair of Psychiatry and Human Behavior. I'm a member of our departmental promotions committee. I counsel and talk with people who are coming up for promotion. And I'll have to say one of the best parts of my job is to be able to review the accomplishments of people who are coming up for promotion and congratulating them once they get promoted. As I'll say in a minute, it's in our interest to have you all promoted. So, don't be shy about coming and talking about what you need to get from point A to point B.
Great. So I am going to kick it off with the first question, which is asking our panelists to share a tip, a promotion tip based on your experiences in the promotion process. And if you'd like to also share a cautionary note or a pitfall, that would be great as well. I am just going to randomly go to Jen Friedman.
Sorry, I would say probably the most important thing, I think of the promotion in terms of the metrics and sort of domain. So you have your scholarly output, grants, and these academic tracks. But one thing I think tends to be hard for people is showing that national reputation and ultimately international. So, and that trips up a lot of people, I think, being very productive. And then we talk about this reputation piece. So as much as you can participate in your national organizations, Shelley mentioned this from a research standpoint, not just like pay your dues and be a member, but as much as you can be part of subgroups, if there are opportunities to review abstracts for meetings, talk to people in your discipline, invite them to give talks here outside your region. And then hopefully they'll invite you, offer to give a talk at in another institution. Lots of different ways to sort of point to that reputational piece, but I think it can be a tricky area for people, and start thinking about it early as you can, and work with colleagues. Again, maybe your department chair, division director, about being suggested and getting that national reputation going. You can also do that by agreeing to review grants for foundations and obviously NIH. So those are really some suggestions as to how to do that. Also, editorial boards and reviewing manuscripts is helpful too.
Great, I totally agree. So how about Tony?
Well, a couple of things I'd like to mention, because one deficiency that I see most commonly when I review faculty CVs is the piece about mentoring. And I think this is really important because it's something relatively new that Brown emphasizes as a significant activity and time commitment that you make as an academic physician here in our medical school. And it's something that you do so automatically that it's almost like a curbside consult sometimes. You don't put any thought into what you're doing. But there are lots of different categories where you can emphasize the mentoring that you've done, whether it's because you've been assigned as a remediator for a particular resident, whether you've helped with grand rounds presentations, whether you might advise them as far as their career is concerned, and maybe just life balance and life circumstances. I think all of those have an important time commitment that you've made. And what I usually recommend to our faculty is that you jot this down in an organized way, such as you indicate the person, whether and the status of that person, whether they're a medical student, fellow, undergraduate sometimes even, or resident. Indicate the type of mentoring that you've done in the categories that are sort of outlined, and roughly when that took place. Not how many times it took place, but roughly when it took place, to give you some idea, because it is something you do almost automatically. You know, sometimes it's between cases in the OR, and sometimes it's between patients in the clinic, and it's almost second nature to you. So I think that's an important thing. The other thing I want to say is that I always get asked, well, how many peer review publications do I need? How many invited presentations do I need? I think if you try and look for that information on the Brown website, you're not going to find it. And I think it's for a good reason. The reason is that it's really the total package that we're interested in. And there are some candidates that are going to be very, very strong in one of the criteria and somewhat weak in the other criteria. And things balance off very, very well. And I think if you have a good mentor and you have a good chair, which all of you do, they can see the balance and the total picture. And don't get too bogged down on the details of each individual category. They're important, but it's really the bigger picture that we like to try and emphasize. That's it.
Thanks, Tony. Steve.
So I'd just like to emphasize what Jen had to say. I think you're finding a mentor who's excited about advancing your career in your department is very important. That mentor can introduce you to other colleagues and get you into positions in editorial boards or national organizations. Those are oftentimes great places from which we can get referees to give you solid letters. So it's the personal relationships, not necessarily with direct collaborators, but people who you've met on study section or met in other settings that turn out to be great referees for us. The thing I would also emphasize is don't underestimate yourself. So I think a lot of people kind of think, oh, I'm not really as accomplished as a lot of other people in my department. And, you know, you wait a little bit too long to kind of ask for, can you help me get on a study section, or can you help me be able to get something in a national organization? Again, it's our interest to get you promoted. We've already spent a lot of resources on you. We're out to try to make you successful. So don't underestimate yourselves. Think that you're the most valuable commodity that your department chairs have, and that if you go to them and ask for help, you will receive it. So I just encourage you not to approach people because you're hesitant about are they going to really be helpful or not.
It's great. And I've got to say that, to underscore that, one of the things that comes up in our CMFA discussions of candidates is, why has it taken them so long to get promoted? As opposed to, you know, why are they up for promotion? It's like, why weren't they promoted 5 years ago? So yeah, I totally, yeah, and we want to emphasize that. Matt.
Hey, a couple of things. They're more kind of nuts and bolts stuff. One being always constantly be updating your CV. It's easy to, you know, you're active throughout the year. You're awarded. You're participating. You're getting invited for presentations. When you've received an award or when you've done a presentation, go right to your CV and put it in there, because may say a couple of years down the road, when your department administrator asks, all right, I'm going to need your CV for your dossier, you're not trying to recall what you've done over the past couple of years. It's right there, right fresh in your CV and ready to go. And the second is to get to know your department administrator. They are very familiar with putting together dossiers. They do it throughout the year for your colleagues, and they know what the committee is looking for in terms of, like, you know, the CV, make sure it's in the proper format, or you know, maybe your personal statement, this one's too long, this one's too short. They can help guide and sort of help massage your dossier so that it's ready for a prime time when it comes to our committee. And they're just an invaluable resource. And they're just great folks to work with. So if you don't know who they are, get to know them. We have on our website some contact information for all your chairs and your department administrators, but you can also reach out to me and I can help you get in touch with them.
Great, thanks, Matt. And Matt works really, really closely with the department administrators who oversee promotions. So he is very knowledgeable and terrific at that. So he reviews a lot of dossiers. So now I am going to invite Alex Kelleher, who is the Director of Biomed Faculty Administration, to tee up some of the questions from our audience.
Thank you, Shelley. Yep, we've already been receiving a few questions in. I encourage everybody to continue sending them my way as we get started here. But to start off, one question that has come in is asking about the advantages of research scholar and teaching scholar tracks related to one another, or on the teaching side, how it may be compared relatively to the clinician educator track for promotion.
So who would like to take that question? Otherwise, I'll cold call somebody. Jen, you unmuted.
I can start a little bit on the CE versus teaching scholar. I would say that teaching leadership position is one of the distinguishing features. So a pretty significant role leading a teaching program is required for the teaching scholar. I think this sort of scholarly output overall is probably higher requirements for the more academic teaching scholar track, I would say. I think there's an understanding that clinician educators are really busy people doing a lot of clinical service and work. I would also say that, clinician educators in that term, so everybody teaches. So I think sometimes that's a little confusing. But clinician educators, we tend to teach more shoulder to shoulder medical students and residents, whereas often the teaching scholar has a little bit more of their scholarship maybe in that discipline, not required that it's medical education, but maybe in that discipline, or more likely to be. I'm trying to think what else. That might be all I've got.
That's good. How about teaching scholar versus research scholar? Anybody?
So I can probably say a few words about that, Shelley. So if you're a research scholar or parens research, the expectation is that you're writing grants and writing papers and getting grants funded and papers accepted. So that's probably the major difference. We now expect our research scholar track folks to also be mentoring, but it's a little bit different than the requirement for teaching scholar, where you're really taking on a major course in the department and trying to develop a national reputation for the work you're doing on the educational side. So I would say they're quite different. People do switch from one to the other, but it's mostly where your passion lies that you should be thinking about. That's where you should be in that track.
Great.
Great. All right. One question that has just come in is more of a bit of a structural question for assistant professors who may finish their 3 terms as assistant professor, have potentially exhausted any extensions. What happens if they are not promoted to associate professors?
I can take that one because it's sort of an administrative question. So, what we see is that usually people are counseled that they may not make it through the promotions process in the track that they're in. So if there is an up or out in your track, so teaching scholar, research scholar, and it seems that you're not going to meet the criterion for promotion, then departments will counsel you to usually switch tracks. And so that's why I do up or out in air quotes, because almost no one is out. It's just that the work that you may be doing is more appropriate for another track. So it's usually what we see is teaching scholars who, might not have published enough at the time that they have to come up for promotion. They're doing a ton of clinical work and teaching in the context of their clinical work, and they switch to the clinician educator track. So that's the most typical thing we see. But we don't see people losing their jobs because they're not promoted. That just doesn't happen. And we also don't see people coming up for a promotion and being turned down. As I said, it should happen well before the point that they might come before CMFA. So there are lots of exit ramps and detours that people can take. So we take advantage of that.
Great. One question that came in about grants and involvement there. What counts as collaborative research in terms of an applicant's role on a grant?
Oh, if you don't mind. My understanding is that back about 3 or 4 years ago, correct me, Shelley, if I'm wrong, this was changed a bit in that up until that time, it was felt that someone needed to have an independent grant to achieve the associate professor level in the research scholar or the research parens track. But then it became apparent that the attainment of that maybe it was not quite in the same timeline that it had been in the past. And as a result, that's been liberalized a bit. But in order to be able to have a collaborative role in someone else's grant, who is a principal investigator, you have to demonstrate that you've contributed independently on that particular grant, that you have a focus on that particular grant that you're sort of in charge of and working on independent from the major grant itself. So there has to be collaboration in a sense that you're working off the same grant, but you have a separate focus is the way that I've often interpreted that.
And I'd say that these criteria vary a little bit from department to department. And so I know in psychiatry, we still are looking for making certain that the person has either established a independent national recognition, which oftentimes comes with a PI grant, an NIH grant, but there's also increasing recognition that in genetics, in imaging, that there's many of these very large consortiums where grants are awarded to lots of different people. And so I think we've loosened up our criteria a little bit for that, but I'd like to stress it does vary a little bit from department to department. I know we may be a little bit stricter with some of those criteria than some of the others.
I would just say in a very concrete way, obviously being a co-investigator on an NIH grant is one. Even if you are in a larger program project grant, if you have a project that's part of that, that tends to also be distinguishing and unique within the bigger program. Sometimes core directors who've really put in a lot of service over the years, supporting other people's grants and research and bring real expertise in that domain. Often people will, and CMFA I think really takes that very seriously. I think there's been a move toward team science, collaborative science, and I think it takes a lot of different skills to do that. And I think a personal statement's also a very good way to point out how your work is unique, how you're making distinguishing contributions to the research program that are not sort of just part of your mentor's work.
I totally agree.
All right, should we do one more question before we break out?
Yeah, I think so. I think we can, yeah.
Okay, one last question. We've gotten a number in, so this is wonderful. Presentations. Could we comment on separating them into invited versus non-invited to assist with showing your growing reputation, national, international reputation? Are there any guidelines for determining what is considered an invited presentation?
Don't all jump at that one.
I actually think it's a really important one, to be honest.
I do too.
We're trying to get through a CV, right? Because many people attend a national meeting. And so that is a little different if you have a poster accepted than to really be invited to be a speaker at either that meeting, whether there's a special, you lead a workshop. It's not just that you submitted an abstract that got accepted. So I think that is weighted a little bit higher and viewed with a little bit more cred, and particularly in terms of national reputation and your recognition within the field. I also would just recommend that if you do have a platform presentation as opposed to a poster at a meeting, you really asterisk and say that it was at least elevated to that level of a broader presentation to the meeting.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, it's a subtle difference in terms of invited, not invited, like you may have submitted, a proposal to present, and then you were invited. I count that as an invited presentation. You don't have to get a de novo out of the blue invitation to present to include it among your invited presentations.
I would agree with all of that. Just one additional caveat, and that is when you are invited as a faculty person for a CME course, it may not seem like the same sort of national meeting that you've been a panelist on, but that also counts as an invited presentation as well and should be included.
Absolutely, totally agree. So Alex, are we good?
I did get one other, just
Okay.
while we were talking here,
Sure.
one other last, a good question that I think might be worthwhile trying to cover in just a moment. Can we comment on junior faculty or faculty looking to get promoted who have come in from outside of Brown? How is their time outside of our system kind of counted or considered, or is there a sense of resetting that needs to be done?
I can answer from the CMFA. Steve, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I can say our experience in our department, the amount of time since you became an assistant professor at another institution definitely counts, although it doesn't count against you in terms of how long you have for 9 years. But, if the average person comes up at, let's say, 6 or 7 years in our department for promotion, if they've been 3 years somewhere else and, they've accrued publications there and perhaps grants, that certainly counts, towards promotion here.
Yeah, and I would just say that you still have to meet the criteria, but it won't be looked at that you're coming up early if you spent, a number of years at the same rank at another institution. And I think that's what people worry about. But so you're not disadvantaged at all. Great.
Great.
So
Thank you.
I am going to encourage people who may have questions still that have not been answered to ask them in the breakout sessions. That makes sense. Does that look like it would make sense, Alex?
That's exactly what I was just going to say. So yes.
Okay, there you go. So we are then, I think, ready to go into the breakout sessions. I want to first thank our breakout session facilitators, and here they are listed. So Research Scholar Track, it's Gada Bojeli and John McKeary. For Perens Research, it's Daphne Coynes-Mitchell and Lindsay Orchowski. And for the Teaching Scholar Track, it's Star Hampton and Rebecca Gardner. And I want to thank them so much, and also thank our panelists for taking this time and sharing your wisdom and your experiences around the promotion processes.